Right. It's the second of the three sections of Inferno by Aline Miles, a poet's novel. And this is called Drops. And it's submitted by Aline Miles to the Ferdinand Foundation, which seems to be, it's like a grant application, except it's very much a grant application about a poet recounting their life and how they can't get a grant application, and maybe being a working class poet has one of the things that stymied her from getting actual support. It's one of these things of, we've got, like, you can talk about the three sections being hell, purgatory, and paradiso, or heaven in this case. So this is the purgatory section of a poet's life. She's actually is a poet, and now we're going. And indeed, it starts off with the thing of the abstract. The second section of my novel, Inferno, coincides with Dante's Purgatorio, and in it I concern myself with the career of the poet. So yeah, so that's the thing of, like, I am following both Dante and Freud's model for existence. Yeah, yeah, okay. So let's read some stuff. I have a lot of things turned down, but uh, I can see when I come back to edit this, I'm going to have to cut it down severely, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm going to try and, yeah, yeah. There's a little thing here of, like, when, coming to a kind of a benefit thing of a women's coalition where women are, she's like, about building homes. She smiles in Wellfleet for the firemen, the police, the nurses, and the street cleaners, the people who clean your cesspool. The room chuckles. And this is like affordable housing, and it's like, they're building serving servant quarters. We hiss. Didn't they already take these people's homes? We fume. I mean, they bought the land the working people's kids would have built on. No future for them, Marilyn laughs bitterly. So there's definitely a kind of a class aspect to that Eileen Miles always brings to her work of, like, I'm looking at this as someone who is like a working class, not wealthy, not kind of the privilege and kind of just being able to do stuff. Um, Here's an example of one of her poems. It's called Joan, about Joan of Arc, and about, she spends a lot of time in this section, a hunk in this time in this section, talking about a play that she put on, and being the director, and the kind of the uncomfortableness, and maybe not being the greatest director, and kind of interactions with the dancers, as well as all that, and how that was. This time it was a liturgy. Joan was like a medieval community theater, a passion play. It opened with a procession of a dozen women in powder blue t-shirts carrying sparklers, while a Georgian chant echoed in the background. And here's the poem. Joan. Today, May 30th, Joan of Arc was burned. She was 19, and when she died, a man saw white doves fly from her mouth. Joan was born in 1412 between Lorraine and Champagne. Joan was raised on legends. Merlin said France would be lost by a woman and saved by a virgin. Joan was not an adventurous girl, not a tomboy, but very dreamy, good, stay at home, the baby of the family. Joan never got her period. She heard these voices in the bells. She saw angels in colored glass. She believed the sun moved around the earth because that's what she saw. She believed God wanted Charles VII to be king of France, because that's what Michael, Catherine, and Margaret told her when she listened to the bells. Her father said he'd drown her if she didn't stop this nonsense. She was 19 years old when they burned her body in the middle of town while she was still alive. A white dove came out of her mouth as she died. 567 years ago today, a dove leaped right out of her mouth. All right. There's a thing here of being at a gay bar, and saying that the gay guys there wanted her. Later, they invited Chris and me to do an excerpt from Joan, and also to take part in a skit about Valerie Solanas. Of course, we love Valerie Solanas and the Scum Manifesto. She was just like us. Valerie Solanas was our idol. We got totally booed by those gay guys. I think it was why we were invited in. Lesbians in general were verboten on this scene. You had to hide yourself in a gay culture. So, and Valerie Solanas being famously having shot Andy Warhol in 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 her short life. Um, oh my God. Let's see if I can grab the quotes that. The theme of race definitely permeates my Inferno. For instance, for years I had an ongoing fight with Aramini Baraka, who was outraged at the spectacle of a white lesbian writing about sex, which was me. He and I were at this poetry conference, and after I spoke, he proclaimed that lesbian poetry and okay, let's try that again. The theme of race definitely permeates my Inferno. For instance, for years I had an ongoing fight with Armini Baraka, who was outraged at the spectacle of a white lesbian writing about sex, which was me. He and I were at this poetry conference, and after I spoke, he proclaimed that lesbian poetry and feminist poetry were pornographic and not revolutionary. And so, she kind of took that up, and they kind of had a back and forth, and it was one of these things. I just always spoke up. That was me. And I'm trying to say that in the poetry world, there is one kind of acceptable white speech and white poetry. And I knew I was always occupying another. I wanted to know what you would call it. At the very least, I had to say I had to say it was there, this problem. And, she talks about how, there was another panel, and we liked each other, exchanged cards. Like it had been a joke. Then I reviewed a book called Heroism in Black Poetry, and I read that his father was a mailman, and Baraka himself was the first in his family to go to college. And I thought about him departing the white poetry scene for his politics. And in general, I identified with interviews with black poets much more than I ever did with white poets. Yeah, I'll just probably drop that. I don't think I'm going anywhere with it. Um, hmm. She uses a lot of underlinings and strikeouts in this section. Stuff like the dancer standing there was like a big cookie. This is her back as the director of this thing. The dancer standing there was like a big cookie, a cookie I would soon be jamming my fist into. And that line is struck out as maybe as an inappropriate one, and we get that kind of humor throughout, but also kind of like emphasis and stuff. Another poem. Shh. I don't think I can afford the time to not right down and write a poem about the heavy-lidded white rose I hold in my hand. I think of snow, a winter night in Boston, drunken waitresses stumble on a bus that careens through Somerville at the end of the line, where I was born, an old man shaking me. He could have been my dad. You need a ride? Wait, he said. This flower is so heavy in my hand. He drove me home in his old blue Dodge, a thermos next to me, cigarette packs on the dash. So quiet, like Boston is quiet. Boston in the snow. Its New York plates are clattering on St. Mark's Place. Should I call you? Can I go home now and work with this undelivered message in my fingertips? It's summer. I love you. I'm surrounded by snow. What you got there? Okay. I really prefer if you didn't chew up that stuff. There. Chew up that stuff. That's a bone. there's a bit of a section here about her and her dog, getting her dog Rosie, and looking down at the things, and it's one had the eyes of wisdom. An old little dog who stared at me while his brothers were sucking away. She'd go down herself, still looking up at me with one eye. And yeah, she was wild. This is Rosie again. She was wild, wild, running at me in the glee of total immersion in this white, bright new substance. I took her to Cherry Grove with Jeanette, where she encountered a wave. I see that moment like an eternal, still woodblock wave that is curling yeah. You, my little darling, need to have your bone and just chill and not get into mischief. Right there. Take that. That. No, you're not interested in that, are you? Right there. Okay, I'm going to go find a bone for somebody. Let's try that again. She was wild, wild, running at me this is Rosie. She was wild, wild, running at me in the glee of total immersion in this wet, bright new substance. I took her to Cherry Grove with Jeanette, where she encountered a wave. I see that moment like an eternally still woodblock wave that is curling ominously over a small black and white dog. And Rose, entirely frightened and in awe. I'm in love. Which is it's that kind of that purity that is the joy of having a little creature that whose life you get to share in. Here's a bit, just like kind of a little thing of just sort of sadness. Once in a while, very rarely, when I felt this bad, I hold on. I stay in that little blue hallway outside despair for a moment. It's other people thinking, not mine. See what comes, they chirp. Here's another little thing of Rose and taking the city dog into the country, and suddenly it's a different dog. Um, when she stood in the woods for the first time and heard something and stopped abruptly and stood still, then she bent her right paw in an animal salute to the hunt, to attention. Come on, Rose, you're from New York. Where'd you learn that? Instead, she was deaf and dumb to all she had known before. She was another dog. It's like, yeah, cool. That kind of attention to detail, and that attention to kind of like the moment is it definitely earns the whole thing of a poet's novel. We'll get into that, whether it's a poet's novel or if it's novelized memoir, if we need to worry about it. Oh, here's something of just like one of these strange, just a strange event in someone's life, something that's sort of like inexplicable. Out in the country again. One morning when I started out, I saw up in the sky something that resembled an old set-in fan that had removed cooking odors and smoke from the kitchen I grew up in. Now that fan was turning in the sky. I felt dizzy watching the tiny spirals of blades flickering, and I thought, I am going to die. Not today, but exactly like this. My inside will cast a whirling image for me to concentrate on. My heart or something, or even older, failing. My light. I named it all. The trees, the road, the frightening fan, the undiscovered country, which yielded a tiny poem I could never get right. The tenses always at odds. But it really happened. I saw my death in the sky. Yeah. There's a whole thing here about how she wanted to study Spanish in college, but the line was too long, so she ended up studying German and reading Goethe and especially Werther, the sorrows of young Werther in the original German. And like, when you're young, if you were young like I was, well, I was just fucked, which is definitely the whole thing about young Werther, who I came to as an old geezer, and it's like young Werther is a complete idiot. He's a complete fucking idiot, but um, it, young Werther maybe still has that unfortunate kind of romanticism of suicide, which was something that completely horrified Goethe apparently, and he tried to go back and actually correct that, but still to this day, it's seen as something that does. She actually goes on a tour in Germany, and one of the things that the thing that she can really remember, uh, the thing that she can remember of it, where is it? Um, in Weimar, we didn't read, but that was where Goethe's house was. I took some pictures, but most in Weimar, we didn't read, but that's where Goethe's house was. I took some pictures, but most memorably, for me, I peed in his yard. They didn't tell us where the bathrooms were, and though I realized it was infantile, I entirely enjoyed it. Okay, we're going to. Someone needs to go somewhere else. I'll pause. Um, she says she has one that as a poet, Miles says that she believes that she's written one distinctly famous poem. It's called An American Poem, and it's got the refrain in the poem, "I am a Kennedy." I am a Kennedy, which actually I have read because this is the first book of hers that I ever picked up, which was Not Me, and is contained within. And she kind of reflects that while the poem is famous, it doesn't necessarily mean that that she particularly is. But no, in fact, the poem itself has become famous. Or the film or the person in the film, but not actually her. And she kind of goes into a kind of an interesting talk about Robert Musil's The Man Without Qualities, or Der Mann und Eigenschaften. I'm that's entirely my guess, but I probably won't go with that. This actually it does contain American Poem, which I will not read out because it is a long poem, and hey, that's one of the ones that you can joy of having. Here's another thing, a little bit more sort of her kind of reflecting on stuff like race. Have you noticed that black children generally are photographed in groups? That's what I'm told. White photographers just have a hard time wrapping their minds around black kids as individuals. Unless one gets killed by a stray bullet or is like Tasha, this poet girl who got strangled with a phone cord because she didn't pay her cell phone bill to a neighborhood guy. Then the paper will carry an individual portrait, school picture, or snapshot. What's subliminally driven home is that a universal universe of invisible danger awaits anybody of the underclass who leaves their group wanting more. Because if you're not picked, really taken up by the mainstream as a winner, you'll probably get stomped on as a loser. So smile for the camera and stay in your chair. There is, and within this section, drops, which is this application to the Ferdinand Foundation. I don't believe it's an actual real foundation. There's little things of like you know thing of you always get to know how the real person fared. My work does this too, but my the whole idea of like at the very end of a movie, they'll have a little chyrons that will say like, oh, this fictional character, here's how the real person fared, and so she says my work does this too, but in a disturbing, like you are radically reminded that you are hanging out with God way, God or Eileen. That is my project, and I think that's why it's been difficult for me to get funded. Yeah, lots of kind of those kind of references to like getting funded and what does that mean, and what's her role. Being a poet is like a passport to getting to have a certain kind of life, a certain kind of entry into stuff. The book definitely deals with a lot of real people. Real people come up in this book, this novel. It's a novel, but whenever you like say someone's name comes up and you Google it, it's actually the person. There's a Kathy in here, which later in the thing gets referred to as Kathy Acker, who is a famous experimental poet, experimental novelist, kind of kind of very kind of a radical kind of a personality. Um, and there's a thing here about like them going in a tour in Germany, um, and how Kathy she bought these expensive outfits all over Germany. A little sailor girl outfit, little white shirt with a deep blue collar, a little cap. It cost hundreds of dollars for her to look like a doll. Her and Richard were the stars of the tour, and when we got the pictures back from Germany, that's how it looked. We were the earnest, smiling kids having their opportunity to pose with Mickey Mouse. Um, and and there's this whole thing of like one night where she was reading her poetry in Germany, and it was like I guess a crowd that had didn't understand English at all. In Berlin, they really do not understand English is underlined, and she's doing uh, all reading in English. Fine, and like there's a crowd, but the crowd seemed to be all kind of looking up in a certain thing. And then finally, someone smilingly pointed behind me. There was a cameraman on his knees, moving up and down the gorgeous tattoos covering Kathy's arms. And over my head was a giant screen everyone was gazing at, which displayed the tremendous undulating rose, which was Kathy. I am the backup singer to Kathy Acker's fucking tattoos. Meanwhile, across her face was a little smile. Why not smile? It felt good. You asshole! I screamed. I went off on the cameraman. I made a very eloquent speech about the silencing power of the media. Nan told me later I didn't need to get mad. I was somehow missing the point, or taking it wrong. Oh, sure, Nan. During some show of yours, they should hit the lights and project somebody else's work on the wall. Larry Clark, some cool guy. So, she has a thing here of like, I don't know if I can blame Kathy for the moment I'm about to describe. It's like, but yeah, kind of she does. So it's definitely kind of it's this Eileen character that this is getting created in here, whether it is a real one or not, is definitely one where it's taking advantages of all the foibles and jealousies and insecurities of this Eileen, um, whether it's fictional or not. If Eileen Miles writes a poem about being a Kennedy when she's not a Kennedy, but for the fictional purposes, the poem she is, it's like, well, she's this Eileen in these books is like, is it her? Is it not? Who knows? I don't care. It's just the pleasure, I guess, of the pleasure of reading it. Um, she has this whole thing of like where she kind of really kind of failed at this poetry reading, talking about foibles or kind of insecurities or just like not being that casting herself as not that great. Walking home in my suit from the performance, I was intensely sad. I recited the poem then. It was a street I always walked her on, her being Rose who had kind of disrupted her poetry reading. First Ave, and often I rehearsed poems walking down the street. This was before cell phones, so it was just us, the performance artists and the crazy people, talking to ourselves. It was sad because finally it was a sweet performance, and I got it. Walking among the drunken kids, the late shift workers coming home, and panhandlers, I realized happily that now I didn't have to walk her. Not tonight. I don't know if that makes any sense if you don't actually have the thing. I didn't particularly frame it really great. I have so much stuff to edit through here, aren't I? There is the kind of a whole thing of kind of the idea of awards in here as well. Kind of like there's grants and there's awards, and she has interesting things to say about it. So in the arts department, it's in the awards department. It's worse than art. No poetry-driven economy, no critical machinery. There's no thing at all, which could be Zen, but instead it's entirely the opposite. It's so symbolic, and it's so symbolic and humorless. Awards are the only currency American writing culture has to describe a writer's work. It's almost French, But in France, at least the ribbons mean something. You get a dinner, a bottle of wine. People know you. Here it's nothing. And like everything else, horribly, eventually it leaches into the soil. Even Allen Ginsberg wanted an award. The week before he died, he emailed Bill Clinton to say, "I'm Allen Ginsberg, the poet. I've never received any kind of award from my country, and it would be great if I could get something before I die." So, yeah, yeah. Um, we kind of bop back. It's kind of everything kind of it's kind of circles and circles, and it hops from one thing to another. We and then we'll leap back and things like that, and we leap back to Dante again, um, where you know I went to Ravenna. I went to Ravenna to visit Dante's grave. I got a traveling grant for it. This older couple took my picture in front of Dante's big mound. It was a handsome flat stone surrounded by ivy. It would look great on the back of this book. Blurbs streaming across the ivy. Ravenna was an ugly town, mall-like and depressing. I didn't want to stay there long, so I raced around to all those tiny chapels with the mosaics. I had an hour before they closed, so I gunned it in order to hover stilly for 10 minutes in the same alabaster light that Dante did. I imagined it the morose light of the Inferno. We craned our necks at the riverman with a walking stick who moved silently across the ceiling. He was a god, but he seemed even older. It was a cartoon movie from a time when Christianity was so young, even gods had friends and advisors. Um, she has a whole thing here of kind of imagining what's the marketing department going to think about, how could she market her book, and this proposal. And it's like, this proposal is a guidebook. It follows the utter singularity of my entire writing career, the shape my writing forces you through. I mean, for as long as I can remember, I've been trying to break into reality through this one idea, this medium, poetry. Yet, where did I get the idea to write about myself, to use my own name? It isn't that natural. Will I talk about that idea? I may not have another opportunity in my life to do this. So yes, I will. So, kind of the hapless thing of a poet getting kind of churned through the mill and getting published. There's also definitely kind of the sense of purgatory in this book of like there's travel, there's getting to live, getting having kind of wealthier patrons who allow her to live in their homes. But if you live in a person's home, you eventually start looking through it. All lives are transparent if you go there, if you have the time. But that just made me sad. It was their lens, not mine. Even a poet wants to own not just a poem, but something. A telescope, a journey. I guess this grant, it's kind of a claim. I had agreed never to pin a picture to the wall, leave a saucer or a pen. I had a coffee grinder. I brought it back and forth. A bag of coffee. Did I leave anything at all? A book? I lost a notebook once, which I blamed on Todd. Todd is one of the kind of the caretakers of the thing. There's a really and then you get like little really disturbing things, which is like she's at this place, and she and her dog come across a hedgehog, and it's one of these things of you want this to be fictional because um you know um yeah, they come across a hedgehog. Rosie was crouching as a fat hedgehog skidded blithely across the lawn. I thought about bringing her in, but I was kind of in awe I was kind of in awe. I lit up a smoke. I enjoyed watching her kill. It's like, and what we get is a really horrific thing of a the hedgehog dug in and started clicking. It rattled, And Rosie began circling, lunging hard, and with each circle, each time getting a big, painful bit of the animal in her mouth. And now the creature was spitting blood. I felt powerless, so my watching only grew deeper. Now the base of the tree was doused in blood, what remained of the hedgehog's mad attempts to defend himself. I still hear that sound. It's like women make that clicking sound while they're thinking. Men do it too, but not so many. It's some kind of ghastly count, a skull speak. Women are ghoulish, in fact, which is like, oh, yeah, we suddenly went to the, it's funny, through the vehicle of Rosie, where you get the kind of the joy of Rosie, we also suddenly get somewhere very horribly primal and ugly, enjoying watching a kill. Um, which, yeah, I mean, people talk about like having to like that. It's like, I don't like that, but it's fast. I find it fascinating. I find it fascinating. Um, I'm not going to do the whole ode to shit, ode to the dog taking a shit. I'll leave that to your imagination. Here, I'll just read the final paragraph of the section. Probably won't use it, but I turned to the horizon. I headed that way. I saw a house and those telltale piles of stone they call Heliu. Those little piles are holy. The house was the beginning of the road. There was actually the final section of the book ends with her going to Hawaii, and the big thing that she wanted to do was see a volcano. Actually, that's where we actually do get another little mention of these things of a real person um, that she met one time. Yeah, um, the final section is talking about going to Hawaii to see a volcano. And this is another one of these sections where there's a brief mention of someone, and I Google it, and it's actually correct. It's not correct, but it's fact, I guess. It's like I knew a poet, Joel Colton, who died in the Helena, who died in the St. Helena eruption in the early '80s. I drove there last year and was thinking about him. He came to my apartment once and took some Polaroids. He was a good poet. He loaded up his truck and drove to Mount St. Helens and was taking photographs there on the day 1980 when the explosion happened. And indeed, some workers found his body and his remains like a couple of months later. It's like very sad, but also it's like, it's a novel, but it's all filled with all these actual factual accounts. And assumably she actually knew this fellow. But yeah, she goes to Hawaii, and she wants to see a volcano, wants to see a live volcano, and I guess that's you get into the inferno again, and it recounts her going up, climbing up in the mountain, getting dark, and her basically ending up spending the entire night there, thinking she's almost going to die, but not not dying, I guess. Um, but I turned to the horizon. I headed that way. I saw a small house and those telltale piles of stone they call Heliu, he, he, Hilau. I turned to the horizon. I headed that way. I saw a small house and those telltale piles of stone they call Hel, Hilau. God. I turned to the horizon. I headed that way. I saw a small house and those telltale piles of stone they call Hilau. Those little piles are holy. The house was the beginning of the road, and there was my dark green rental car and my water. And I drove out of the park. I had to get some caffeine, lots of it, because I was falling asleep at the wheel. Everything was good after that. All three planes, and especially now, giving this account to you. And that ends that section of drops, the second section. And next will be heaven. I don't know how I'm going to edit all this at all, but it's my experiment and probably my tribute to finding out exactly how much work Dane puts into stuff, and maybe you get better at this if you did more than one novel. I don't know if we'll do more than one novel. All right, more videos later.